Welcome to Eternal Enigma. The Ars Goetia contains 72 demons, 72 beings of immense power, each with specific abilities, specific ranks, specific methods of summoning and dismissal. Medieval magicians studied the Grimoire obsessively, memorizing rituals, protective circles, binding words, and the precise protocols for each demon. But even among these practitioners, men who dedicated their lives to summoning the most dangerous entities in existence, there was one name that caused hesitation, one demon that even experienced occultists refused to call, one being whose reputation was so terrifying that entire sections of the Grimoire warned repeatedly, "Do not attempt this unprepared, do not attempt this alone, do not attempt this at all, unless you are absolutely certain of your protection." Don't forget to subscribe and like the video. His name is Asmodeus, King of Demons, Lord of Lust, Destroyer of Kings, the being who killed 7 husbands in a single night and laughed. And today you're going to find out exactly why every summoner who ever opened the Ars Goetia feared him above all others. To understand why Asmodeus is uniquely dangerous among the 72, we need to understand what makes a demon in the Ars Goetia dangerous in the first place. Most Goetic demons are dangerous in predictable ways. They might lie, they might try to escape their binding, they might cause physical harm if improperly contained. But these dangers are manageable if the summoner follows protocols correctly. The Grimoire exists precisely to manage these risks, providing protective circles, binding words, and dismissal rituals that keep the summoner safe. The Ars Goetia is part of the Lesser Key of Solomon, a 17th century compilation of earlier magical traditions. It describes 72 demons bound by King Solomon himself, each assigned a seal, a rank, a number of legions, and a set of powers. The ranking system goes from king at the top, then prince, then duke, then marquis, then count, then knight, then president, and finally earl. Asmodeus holds the rank of king, specifically the 72nd spirit listed, commanding 72 legions of inferior spirits. But raw rank doesn't explain why summoners specifically feared Asmodeus above others like Baal, who commands 66 legions, or Beleth, who rides a pale horse and causes love and is described as extremely terrifying. What makes Asmodeus categorically more dangerous is a combination of factors that no other Goetic demon possesses simultaneously: his origin predating the Ars Goetia entirely, his biblical track record of actual harm, his specific domain targeting human weakness directly, his resistance to standard binding protocols, and his connection to forces outside the Ars Goetia's organizational structure. We're going to examine each of these factors and build a complete picture of why this demon earned his fearsome reputation across thousands of years of testimony. Most demons in the Ars Goetia are relatively obscure before their inclusion in the Grimoire. Their names appear in scattered earlier texts, but their personalities, powers, and specific dangers were largely defined by the Goetic tradition itself. Asmodeus is completely different. He has a fully developed biography spanning multiple religious traditions and thousands of years before a single word of the Ars Goetia was written. His earliest traceable origin is in Persian Zoroastrian tradition, where he appears as Ashma, whose name means demon of wrath or demon of the bloody mace. Ashma is one of the most destructive forces in Zoroastrian cosmology, associated with violence, rage, bloodshed, and the corruption of legitimate desire into consuming destruction. He opposes Sarasha, the divine being of obedience and hearing, making Ashma specifically the demon who corrupts the human faculty of self-control, turning healthy desire into obsessive, destructive hunger. When Jewish exiles encountered Zoroastrian religion during the Babylonian captivity, Ashma merged with existing Hebrew demon traditions to become Asmodai, or Ashmedai in Hebrew texts. The Talmud expands his biography significantly. In Tractate Gittin, Asmodai is described as king of the demons, a being of immense intelligence who actually assists Solomon in building the temple, but only under compulsion and with constant scheming for freedom. The Talmud describes Solomon capturing Asmodai using a magical chain inscribed with the divine name, forcing him to use his power for temple construction. But Asmodai continuously tests Solomon's authority, eventually tricking the king and throwing him 400 leagues from Jerusalem, temporarily usurping his throne. This Talmudic account reveals critical aspects of Asmodeus's danger. He's not simply powerful, he's strategically intelligent. He cooperates with binding when he has no choice, but he never stops looking for the moment of vulnerability that allows him to reverse the situation entirely. He threw the most powerful king and magician in history off his throne, This isn't demonic brute force, it's patient, calculating intelligence waiting for the single mistake that changes everything. In the Book of Tobit, which is canonical scripture for Catholic and Orthodox Christians, Asmodeus appears by name and demonstrates his most terrifying ability. Sarah, a young Jewish woman in Media, has been married 7 times. 7 different husbands on 7 different wedding nights, all killed by Asmodeus before the marriage was consummated. The text states simply, "The evil demon Asmodeus loved her and killed each man before he could be with her. 7 men, dead. 7 families destroyed. Sarah is suicidal from guilt and social shame, convinced she'll never escape his fixation. The archangel Raphael is specifically sent by God to deal with this situation. And even Raphael requires special means, fish organs burned as incense to drive Asmodeus away, after which he flees to Egypt where Raphael binds him there. Note what this means. Asmodeus killed 7 men over presumably years of time, resisted no other intervention, and was only driven away by an archangel using specific divine-mandated countermeasures. This is canonical scripture confirming that Asmodeus is capable of sustained targeted harm that withstands normal spiritual countermeasures. Understanding Asmodeus's domain is essential to understanding his unique danger. He's commonly described as the demon of lust, which sounds less frightening than a demon of death or warfare. But this description dramatically undersells his actual domain, which is far broader and more insidious than simple carnal desire. In the Lemegeton and related traditions, Asmodeus rules over lust, but medieval demonologists consistently expanded this categorization. Johann Weyer's Pseudo-Monarchia Daemonum describes him as inspiring gambling and deceit in addition to lust. The Dictionnaire Infernal connects him to wrath and revenge. Peter Binsfeld's classification of demons to the 7 deadly sins assigns Asmodeus to lust specifically. But Colin de Plancy notes his influence extends to jealousy and possessiveness. The pattern across sources is consistent. Asmodeus rules not just lust but the entire spectrum of obsessive desire, the corruption of love into possession, of pleasure into addiction, of affection into destructive fixation. This domain is uniquely dangerous for several reasons. First, it attacks the human faculty most difficult to resist. Fasting, prayer, intellectual discipline, spiritual practices, these can defend against demons of pride or avarice by addressing those specific weaknesses. But Asmodeus's domain is embedded in biological drives that even the most disciplined humans struggle to govern. He doesn't need to overcome your defenses. He works through drives that already exist within you. Second, his influence is subtle and progressive. A demon of violence announces itself through obvious disruption. Asmodeus's work looks like normal human desire until it doesn't. His corruption follows a pattern described consistently across demonological texts. First, he amplifies normal desire, making it feel more intense and urgent. Then he subtly redirects that desire toward destructive objects or expressions. Then he creates obsession that overrides judgment. Then he uses that obsession to destroy relationships, health, reputation, and spiritual life. By the time the target recognizes demonic influence, the corruption is already deep. Third, his domain gives him access to the most intimate spaces of human life. Demons of war operate in battlefield contexts. Demons of plague operate through disease. But Asmodeus operates in bedrooms, in marriages, in the most private aspects of human relationship. The Book of Tobit shows him specifically targeting the marriage covenant, the most sacred human relationship in biblical tradition. This is strategic. By corrupting love and marriage, he simultaneously attacks human happiness, social stability, family structure, and one of the primary metaphors Scripture uses for the relationship between God and humanity. Fourth, his obsessive fixation on individual targets creates a specific type of danger not found in other demons. Most goetic demons are transactional. They want something from the summoner and will provide service in exchange. Asmodeus can develop fixations on specific humans independent of any summoning, as demonstrated in the Book of Tobit, where he fixated on Sarah for years without being called. This means he can be encountered without being deliberately invoked, a danger unique among the Goetic kings. The Ars Goetia describes Asmodeus's powers as teaching arithmetic, astronomy, geometry, and all handicrafts, also making men invisible, showing the location of treasure, and providing familiars. This sounds almost benign compared to his reputation. But medieval magicians understood that what the Grimoire lists as his powers are what he's willing to provide in controlled summoning contexts. His actual capabilities, demonstrated across centuries of testimony, are far more extensive and far more threatening. The Ars Goetia includes specific warnings about Asmodeus that don't appear for most other demons, and examining these warnings reveals exactly where experienced summoners believe the danger concentrated. The text states that when the exorcist calls upon Asmodeus, he must stand upright with his cap or head covering off, and if he does not, Asmodeus will deceive him and cause all his doings to be in vain. This warning about posture and head covering seems minor, but it reflects a deeper concern. Asmodeus specifically targets the summoner's pride and tendency toward casual assumption of control. The Grimoire also specifies that Asmodeus must be called by his full title as one of the three kings of hell along with Amaimon and Goop, and must be engaged while the summoner faces his direction, which is the north or northeast. Deviation from these protocols doesn't just fail to work, it actively antagonizes Asmodeus in ways that make him hostile rather than compliant. This is different from most goetic demons where protocol failures simply result in failed summoning. With Asmodeus, protocol failures invite active retaliation. Across multiple grimoires and magical texts beyond the Ars Goetia, warnings about Asmodeus center on consistent themes. First, he lies convincingly. Unlike demons who are obviously deceptive, Asmodeus provides accurate information mixed with subtle falsehoods in ways that are nearly impossible to detect. He doesn't lie about everything. He lies precisely enough to direct the magician toward outcomes that serve his purposes. Multiple accounts describe summoners receiving genuine useful information from Asmodeus while being slowly maneuvered into situations that ultimately harmed them. Second, he specializes in making magicians lower their protective barriers. Accounts describe Asmodeus beginning interactions in apparently cooperative, even pleasant ways. He answers questions, provides requested services, and behaves as a bound spirit should. This cooperative phase lasts until the magician becomes comfortable and slightly less rigorous in maintaining protective protocols. That moment of relaxed vigilance is when problems begin. This patient approach, earning trust before exploiting it, mirrors exactly the strategy he demonstrated against Solomon in the Talmud. Third, his influence lingers after dismissal. Standard goetic protocol involves formal dismissal, where the demon acknowledges the session's end and departs. With most demons, proper dismissal ends the interaction completely until the next summoning. Multiple accounts of Asmodeus interactions describe ongoing effects after formal dismissal, intrusive thoughts, dreams, desires, and behavioral changes that persist for days or weeks. Some accounts suggest months. This post-dismissal influence suggests his domain in obsessive desire gives him vectors of continued engagement that normal dismissal doesn't fully close. Fourth, he specifically targets the summoner's desires to create ongoing dependency. Where other demons might attempt to harm the magician directly, Asmodeus works differently. He studies what the summoner desires most and begins fulfilling those desires in small ways that create investment in continued interaction. The magician's desire for what Asmodeus provides becomes itself a hook that keeps the relationship active beyond the summoner's fully conscious choice. This is the demonic equivalent of addiction. The grimoire user doesn't realize they've been caught until breaking away feels genuinely difficult. The most severe warnings in the broader magical tradition beyond the Ars Goetia come from accounts of summoners who worked with Asmodeus repeatedly. John Dee's associates, various Renaissance magicians, and later ceremonial magic practitioners who left records all note a consistent pattern. Initial sessions are manageable, intermediate sessions become progressively more consuming of time and mental energy, and extended engagement with Asmodeus tends toward what the accounts describe as an inversion of the magician's priorities, where serving the demon's interests begins to feel like the primary activity and normal life becomes secondary. Beyond theoretical danger and grimoire warnings, Asmodeus has an extensive historical record of accounts where his involvement caused documented harm. These accounts span cultures, centuries, and religious traditions, providing a consistent pattern of how his influence manifests and where it leads. The most extensively documented case involving Asmodeus is the Loudun possessions of 1634 in France. A convent of Ursuline nuns in Loudun, France, exhibited dramatic possession symptoms, convulsions, blasphemous speech, speaking in unknown languages, supernatural physical feats, and sexual obsession. Multiple exorcists were involved over months of public exorcisms. When demons were compelled to identify themselves, Asmodeus was consistently named among the possessing spirits, specifically identified as the chief demon responsible for introducing sexual obsession and religious blasphemy into the community. The Loudun case resulted in the execution of Urbain Grandier, a local priest accused of sending the demons. Whether Grandier was guilty of witchcraft, whether the nuns were genuinely possessed or experiencing mass hysteria, or whether church and political authorities exploited the situation for various agendas. The Laudon case became the most publicized demonic possession trial in European history. Asmodeus's prominent role in these proceedings, identified specifically rather than just a generic demon, reinforced his reputation across Catholic Europe. The Anneliese Michel case in 1970s Germany, which inspired multiple films including The Exorcism of Emily Rose, involved exorcism sessions recorded on audio tape, where possessing demons identified themselves. Asmodeus was among the entities identified during these sessions. While skeptics attribute Anneliese's condition to mental illness untreated due to misguided religious intervention, the case generated extensive documentation of possession phenomenology that researchers still study. In magical practice traditions, accounts of harmful Asmodeus encounters are sufficiently consistent to establish patterns. The accounts typically describe an initial phase of apparently successful working, where the summoner receives what was requested, a middle phase where the summoner finds themselves increasingly preoccupied with summoning again, a third phase where the focus of desire expands beyond the original intent toward more consuming obsessions, and a final phase where the summoner's relationships, health, and practical life have deteriorated significantly, while they remain convinced they're in control of the situation. The specific harm pattern: deteriorating primary relationships, increasing isolation, consuming obsession with specific desires, progressive neglect of practical responsibilities, and an inability to stop the engagement despite recognizing its harm. This matches exactly what you would expect from a demon whose domain is obsessive desire. He doesn't destroy people through dramatic supernatural violence. He corrupts the faculty of desire until it destroys everything else in the person's life, while they experience the corruption as their own authentic wanting. Medieval accounts of dealing with Asmodeus outside formal summoning contexts, meaning people who attracted his attention through behavior rather than deliberate invocation, describe interventions requiring specific countermeasures. The Book of Tobit established the precedent. Raphael's solution involved fish organs, specifically from the Nile catfish, burned as incense. Medieval Catholic tradition adapted this into specific prayers, the use of incense generally, veneration of the archangels, particularly Raphael, and the sacrament of marriage as spiritual protection against Asmodeus's attacks on marital love. Talmudic and Kabbalistic traditions describe Asmodeus's movements as following patterns that can be avoided. He allegedly cannot cross running water, cannot enter spaces where legitimate sacred relationships are honored, and loses power over those who maintain ritual purity according to their tradition standards. These aren't guarantees of safety, but they represent accumulated wisdom about avoiding his domain of influence rather than confronting him directly. The Ars Goetia contains multiple kings: Baal, Baleth, Paimon, Belial, Asmodai, Vine, Balaam, Zagan, Baleth, again in different enumerations, Persian and others depending on which manuscript tradition is followed. Each of these kings commands significant power, and each carries dangers for imprudent summoners. Comparing Asmodeus to these other kings clarifies exactly where his unique danger lies. Baal, the first king listed and commander of 66 legions, is associated with the ability to grant invisibility and wisdom. His danger is primarily that he appears in multiple forms, as a cat, a toad, a man, or combinations thereof, and these shape-shifting appearances can disorient or confuse the summoner. But Baal's modus operandi is relatively straightforward. He wants to be called, provide his services, and be dismissed. He doesn't have the patient strategic intelligence Asmodeus demonstrates, and he lacks the deep biographical history of causing harm across millennia. Baleth is described as riding a pale horse, terrible and furious, with the sounds of trumpets and other musical instruments preceding him. The Grimoire specifically notes he is very furious at his first appearance, and summoners must show great courage and use specific protocols, including a hazel wand, to force him into submission. His danger is immediate and confrontational, requiring the summoner to dominate him quickly and decisively, or face genuine threat. This is manageable danger for an experienced practitioner because it's obvious and front-loaded. You know immediately whether you've controlled him or not. Paimon is described as a great king, appearing in the form of a man sitting on a dromedary, wearing a crown, with an effeminate face, and coming with a great noise with his host before him. He's considered one of the more cooperative demons when properly approached, and multiple accounts describe successful long-term working relationships. His danger is manageable because he responds well to respect and proper ceremony, and his help is considered genuinely valuable by practitioners. He's powerful, but not particularly hostile without provocation. Belamskrits ko evalok provocation. because the con and Bakafapustadizal is among those of worthier virtue. He appears as two beautiful angels in a chariot of fire, speaks well, distributes presentations and senatorships, and causes the love of friends and enemies. His danger is primarily deception through beauty and eloquence. He lies consistently and requires offerings and gifts that themselves become hooks for ongoing engagement. He's genuinely dangerous, but his deception is well documented and experienced. Summoners know to verify everything he says independently. What separates Asmodeus from all these is the combination of 4 factors no other Goetic king possesses simultaneously. First, an ancient and extensive record of harm predating the Grimoire tradition by thousands of years, demonstrating consistency of danger across wildly different cultural and historical contexts. Second, a domain targeting human weakness that operates through existing drives rather than external assault, making his influence harder to identify and resist than obvious supernatural threat. Third, documented ability to harm individuals without being deliberately invoked, meaning danger exists for people who never opened a grimoire. Fourth, the patient strategic intelligence demonstrated across multiple traditions, the ability to play long games that ultimately reverse the power relationship between him and his summoner. Any one of these factors makes a demon more dangerous than average. All 4 together make Asmodeus categorically different from every other entity in the grimoire. He's not just the most powerful in terms of raw force, he's the most dangerous because of how he applies that power, patiently, subtly, through human desire itself, with intelligence that can outmaneuver even experienced practitioners given sufficient time, and the single moment of lowered vigilance he's always waiting for. We've explored Asmodeus, the most dangerous demon in the ARS GOETIA, and the reasons his name caused hesitation, even among those who studied and practiced the dark arts professionally. We've traced his origin from Persian Eshma through Talmudic Ashmedai to the Asmodeus of the Book of Tobit, establishing a 3,000-year record of consistent harmful behavior, predating his inclusion in the Goetic tradition. We've examined why his domain is more dangerous than combat or destruction. Obsessive desire corrupts through existing human drives, operates subtly and progressively, and gives him access to the most intimate areas of human life. We've analyzed the specific grimoire warnings about protocol failures with Asmodeus, his patient strategy of building trust before exploiting it, his lingering influence after dismissal, and his technique of creating dependency through desire. We've reviewed the historical record of documented harm in cases from the Loudon possessions to modern accounts, establishing consistent patterns of how his influence manifests and where it leads. And we've compared him to other Goetic kings, demonstrating why the combination of ancient track record, insidious domain, uninvoked danger, and patient strategic intelligence makes him categorically more dangerous than even the other powerful kings. The summoners who feared Asmodeus most weren't the inexperienced amateurs who feared everything supernatural. They were experienced practitioners who had successfully worked with multiple demons and had developed genuine competence in Goetic practice. The fact that these experienced operators still approached Asmodeus with exceptional caution, and that many refused to call him at all, tells you more than any theoretical analysis could. He's not the loudest demon, not the most dramatic, not the one who arrives in fire and thunder demanding submission. He's the one who arrives cooperatively, helpfully, almost pleasantly, and then waits with 3,000 years of patience for the single moment when your guard comes down. And then he does what he's always done. What he did to 7 husbands in the Book of Tobit. What he did to King Solomon until an archangel intervened. What the grimoire warns about on nearly every page he appears on. He takes everything you desired, and he uses it to take everything you had. Subscribe to Eternal Enigma for more deep explorations into the beings of the ARS GOETIA and the demonological traditions that surround them. Until next time, remember, the most dangerous enemies are never the ones who announce their threat. They're the ones who make you lower your guard before you realize what's happening. Asmodeus has been doing exactly that for 3,000 years, and he's very, very good at it.